They say money reveals who people really are, but I never thought it would reveal that my own father saw me as disposable. I used to believe family meant loyalty, that blood was thicker than business contracts and quarterly profits. But sitting in that sterile conference room at Meridian Holdings, watching my father shake hands with strangers over the sale of our family legacy, I realized I'd been living in a fairy tale. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The room smelled like expensive cologne and fresh leather portfolios. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the sprawling vineyards of Castellano Valley stretching toward the mountains. The same vineyards my grandmother had planted with her bare hands 60 years ago. The same soil I'd walked through every summer as a child, learning about harvest seasons and fermentation processes before I even knew how to drive. My name is Sofia Castellano, and until that Tuesday morning in September, I was the operations director of Castellano Vineyards, the family winery that had been our pride for 3 generations. I'd spent the last 8 years transforming our small regional operation into a nationally recognized brand, introducing sustainable farming practices, expanding our distribution network, and building relationships with sommelier associations across the country. But none of that seemed to matter as I watched my father, Vincent Castellano, slide a stack of documents across the mahogany table toward 3 suits from Apex Hospitality Group. Men who probably couldn't tell a Pinot Noir from a Cabernet Sauvignon if their lives depended on it. "Sophia," my father said without looking at me, his voice carrying that tone I'd heard 1,000 times in business meetings with strangers. Cold, professional, detached. "I've made the decision to accept Apex's offer. The sale will be finalized within 30 days. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my breath catch in my throat, my hands gripping the edge of my leather portfolio so tightly my knuckles turned white. Around the table sat the usual suspects. My father's longtime attorney, Marcus Webb, our financial advisor, Catherine Mills, and my younger brother, Diego, who was staring out the window like he'd rather be anywhere else. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "You've made the decision?" "When exactly did we discuss this?" Vincent finally looked at me, and for a split second, I saw something flicker across his face. Guilt? Regret? But it disappeared as quickly as it came, replaced by that familiar mask of paternal authority he wore whenever he wanted to end a conversation. "Sophia, sweetheart," he said, using the condescending tone that made my skin crawl. "Sometimes difficult. Decisions have to be made quickly. Apex made an offer we couldn't refuse. $47 million, cash, with a 60-day close. It's time to secure our family's future. Our family's future." The irony wasn't lost on me. He was talking about securing a future by destroying the very thing that had secured our past. I glanced around the table, searching for allies, for someone who might share my shock and outrage. Catherine was shuffling through paperwork, avoiding eye contact. Marcus was typing notes on his tablet with the enthusiasm of someone billing by the hour. And Diego was still staring out that damn window like he was watching paint dry. "And what about the employees?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice level. "Maria's been with us for 15 years. Tom's family has worked our harvest for 3 generations. What happens to them?" One of the Apex executives, a sharp-faced man with silver hair and a smile that never reached his eyes, leaned forward. "Ms. Castellano, I appreciate your concern for the staff. Apex plans to retain approximately 60% of current employees during our transition to automated production systems. 60%. Automated systems. They were planning to gut everything that made Castellano Vineyards special and turn it into another corporate wine factory. "You can't be serious," I said, turning back to my father. "Dad, this isn't just a business. This is Nana's legacy. This is everything she and Grandpa built from nothing. You used to tell me stories about how they mortgaged their house to buy those first 20 acres, how they worked 18-hour days during harvest season, how they— Sophia. His voice cut through my words like a blade. That's enough. The decision is final. Final. As if I was a child being told bedtime was non-negotiable. I sat back in my chair, studying the faces around the table, these people who were carving up my family's legacy like a turkey at Thanksgiving. The strangers from Apex who saw nothing but profit margins and efficiency reports, the advisors who'd probably recommended a dozen similar sales this month. My brother, who couldn't even look at me, and my father, who was treating the destruction of everything I'd worked for as if it were a routine business transaction. But here's what none of them knew. Here's the part of the story that would have changed everything if they'd bothered to include me in their secret meetings and whispered phone calls. For the past 6 months, I hadn't just been running operations and building our brand. I'd been preparing for exactly this moment, because I'd seen the signs. The closed-door meetings I wasn't invited to. The financial documents that suddenly required executive clearance for me to access. The way conversations stopped when I entered rooms. The mysterious calls my father took in his office with the door locked. So I'd started making calls of my own. Quiet inquiries, strategic conversations, building relationships with people who understood the value of what we'd created here. Not just the price tag attached to it. What they were about to discover was that Castellano Vineyards had attracted multiple interested buyers over the past few months. Anonymous investors who appreciated both the financial potential and the cultural significance of our operation. Buyers who'd been carefully evaluating not just our books, but our practices, our people, our commitment to the land. Buyers who'd made competing offers that would arrive at exactly the right moment. I smiled politely as my father signed the preliminary agreement, as the Apex executives congratulated themselves on their acquisition, as Marcus and Catherine discussed transition timelines. Because tomorrow morning, when they thought they had everything wrapped up in a neat little package, they were going to discover that the highest bidder in this auction wasn't Apex Hospitality Group. It was someone much closer to home, someone who'd been watching, listening, and preparing while they planned their betrayal in secret. Someone who understood that sometimes, to save your family's legacy, you have to buy it back from your own family. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Let me tell you who I really am, because my father clearly forgot somewhere along the way. My name is Sofia Elena Castellano, and I'm not just Vincent Castellano's daughter who happened to work at the family winery. I'm the woman who single-handedly dragged Castellano Vineyards from the edge of bankruptcy into the spotlight of national recognition. 8 years ago, when I graduated summa cum laude from UC Davis with degrees in viticulture and business management, our family operation was bleeding money. We were producing decent wine, sure, but we were stuck in 1985 while the industry had moved into the digital age. Our distribution was limited to 3 counties in Northern California. Our marketing strategy consisted of a faded roadside sign, and our books showed we had maybe 18 months before we'd have to start selling off parcels of land just to pay the bills. I could have taken the job offer from Constellation Brands, could have walked away with a 6-figure salary and stock options, working for a company that actually valued innovation and forward thinking. Instead, I chose to come home to Castellano Valley, to the rolling hills where I'd learned to prune vines before I learned algebra, because I believed in what we could become. The first thing I did was modernize our entire operation from the ground up. I installed state-of-the-art temperature control systems in our fermentation tanks, implemented sustainable farming practices that reduced our water usage by 30%, and introduced precision viticulture techniques that improved our grape quality dramatically. While other small wineries were struggling to adapt to climate change, I was already preparing our vines for the challenges ahead. But the real transformation happened when I revolutionized our business model. I didn't just improve our wines, I reimagined how we connected with our customers. I launched our first e-commerce platform, developed relationships with high-end restaurants from San Francisco to New York, and created our signature wine club that now has over 3,000 members nationwide. I remember the night I stayed up until 4 in the morning, redesigning our entire brand identity. Our old label looked like something from a grocery store clearance rack. I worked with a design firm in Napa to create packaging that told our story, the story of 3 generations of Castellanos who'd poured their souls into this soil. The new labels featured hand-drawn illustrations of our original vineyard plots, with gold foil accents that caught the light like morning sun on grape leaves. The results spoke for themselves. Within 2 years, our revenue had increased by 240%. Wine Spectator featured our 2019 Reserve Cabernet on their cover, calling it a masterpiece of New World elegance with Old World soul. Food and Wine named us one of their top 10 boutique wineries to watch. Our tasting room, which used to see maybe 50 visitors on a busy weekend, now requires reservations booked 3 months in advance. I built relationships that money couldn't buy. I spent countless evenings at industry events, not just schmoozing, with distributors, but learning from master sommeliers, connecting with restaurant owners, building genuine partnerships with people who shared our passion for exceptional wine. When Elena Rodriguez from Michelin-starred Solace in Manhattan put our Pinot Noir on her wine list, it wasn't because we paid for placement. It was because she believed in what we were creating. Every harvest season, I was out there at 5 in the morning with our crew, tasting grapes, checking sugar levels, making the crucial decisions about when to pick each block. I learned Spanish so I could communicate directly with our seasonal workers, many of whom had been coming to our valley for decades. I instituted profit-sharing bonuses and healthcare coverage for full-time employees, not because it was required, but because it was right. I also transformed our sustainability practices in ways that became industry models. I partnered with UC Davis researchers to pilot regenerative agriculture techniques that actually improved our soil health while increasing yields. We became the first winery in Castellano Valley to achieve carbon-neutral certification, and our water conservation innovations were featured in Agricultural Science Journal. But perhaps most importantly, I preserved what made us special while propelling us forward. I worked with Nona before she passed 2 years ago, recording her stories, documenting her traditional techniques, ensuring that the wisdom of 3 generations wouldn't be lost to modernization. Our reserve wines still use her original fermentation methods, combined with cutting-edge technology that allows us to monitor and perfect every aspect of the process. I turned our family's struggling operation into what industry publications now call a boutique winery with the efficiency of a major label and the soul of an artisan. Our profit margins rival wineries 3 times our size. Our customer loyalty is unmatched in our market segment, and our brand recognition extends far beyond California. And yet, sitting in that conference room, watching my father treat our success as if it had simply materialized out of thin air, I realized something devastating. He didn't see me as the architect of our transformation. He saw me as an employee who'd happened to be around during our good years. To Vincent Castellano, I wasn't the daughter who'd sacrificed her 20s to build his legacy into something extraordinary. I was just Sophia, the girl who helped out at the winery, who could be excluded from major decisions because, after all, what did I really know about business? He had no idea that while he was having secret meetings with Apex executives, I was having my own conversations with private equity firms who specialized in family business acquisitions, with individual investors who appreciated artisanal operations, with strategic partners who understood that some things are worth more than their sale price. Vincent Castellano thought he was selling a winery. He had no idea he was selling the future I'd spent 8 years building to the one person who'd never let it be destroyed. Me. The betrayal didn't happen overnight. It was a slow burn, a series of small cuts that I initially dismissed as my father's growing stress about the business. But looking back, I can pinpoint exactly when Vincent Castellano decided that his daughter's 8 years of dedication meant nothing. It started 3 months ago with a conversation I wasn't supposed to overhear. I'd stayed late that Tuesday evening. In June, working on our quarterly sustainability report for the California Wine Institute. The main office building was dark except for my desk lamp and the soft glow coming from my father's corner office. I assumed he was reviewing harvest projections, as he often did during the quiet evening hours. As I walked past his office to grab a file from the reception area, I heard voices. Not unusual. Dad often took calls from East Coast distributors after hours due to the time difference. But something about the tone made me pause. "I understand your concerns about the transition," my father was saying, his voice lower than normal. "But Sophia won't be an issue. She's focused on operations, not ownership structure." I froze. Sophia won't be an issue? Issue with what? "The family dynamics are manageable," he continued. "My daughter is passionate about the winemaking process, but she's not involved in strategic planning at the executive level." My heart stopped. Not involved in strategic planning? I'd been leading our strategic initiatives for 3 years. Every major decision, every expansion plan, every partnership agreement had my fingerprints all over it. Yes, I can guarantee a smooth transition without interference from family members who might have sentimental attachments to the current structure. Sentimental attachments. He was talking about my life's work like it was a childhood teddy bear I'd eventually outgrow. I stood in that hallway for 10 more minutes, listening to my father discuss restructuring the management team and streamlining operations for maximum efficiency. He talked about our employees like line items on a balance sheet, about our sustainable practices like expensive hobbies, about our artisanal approach like a quaint anachronism that buyers would need to eliminate. The conversation ended with him saying, "Don't worry about Sophia. When the time comes, she'll understand it's what's best for everyone." I slipped back to my office, my hands shaking as I pretended to work on spreadsheets while my world crumbled around me. That night, I drove home through the vineyard roads I'd traveled thousands of times, seeing them differently. Not as the landscape of my future, but as property being evaluated by strangers who saw only dollar signs and development potential. The signs became impossible to ignore after that. Meeting invites that suddenly required executive clearance for me to attend. Financial reports that Marcus Webb claimed were temporarily restricted while they underwent audit review. Conversations between my father and Diego that stopped abruptly when I entered rooms. Diego, my little brother who'd barely shown interest in the wine business until recently, suddenly attending management meetings and asking detailed questions about profit margins. The same Diego who used to complain that vineyard work was boring manual labor was now discussing operational efficiency with enthusiasm that seemed forced and unnatural. 2 weeks later, I discovered the real extent of the deception. I'd arrived early that Thursday morning to check on our new barrel room installation, only to find my keycard access to the financial offices had been revoked. When I asked Marcus about it, he claimed it was a system error that would be fixed shortly. It was never fixed. Instead, I started noticing other changes. Vendor contracts I'd been negotiating were suddenly being handled directly by executive management. Our insurance policies were being reviewed by external consultants I'd never met. Most tellingly, the quarterly board meeting I'd attended for the past 5 years was rescheduled without notification, and when I asked about the new date, my father told me it had been postponed indefinitely. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. Maria Santos, our head of hospitality who'd been with us since before I was born, approached me after a particularly busy tasting room weekend. "Mija," she said, using the affectionate term she'd called me since childhood, "I need to tell you something, but you cannot say where you heard this." She'd overheard a phone conversation between Diego and someone he called Mr. Richardson. Diego had been discussing timeline concerns and staff retention during ownership transition. When Maria asked him about it later, Diego claimed he'd been talking about expanding our events calendar. But Maria wasn't fooled. She'd been through 3 ownership changes at previous wineries before coming to work for my grandparents. She knew the language of business sales, and she knew the look of family members who were being systematically excluded from decisions about their own future. "They're planning something big," she whispered, "and they don't want you to know until it's too late to stop it." That weekend, I did something I'd never done before. I accessed our business accounts from home, using administrative credentials I'd created years earlier for emergency system maintenance. What I found made my stomach drop. Multiple wire transfers to legal firms I didn't recognize. Payments to business valuation consultants. Most damning of all, a series of communications with something called Apex Hospitality Group, dating back 4 months, a full month before I'd overheard that first conversation. They'd been planning this since March. While I was presenting our sustainability achievements to industry conferences, they were calculating how much money those achievements could generate for new owners. While I was building relationships with restaurant partners who trusted our family name, they were preparing to sell that name to corporate strangers. The emails revealed everything: Apex's interest in our premium vineyard real estate and established brand recognition, their plans to optimize production efficiency and eliminate non-essential operational expenses, corporate speak for firing half our staff and automating everything they could. Most heartbreaking of all were the discussions about management continuity. Apex wanted to retain Diego as a consulting liaison to provide institutional knowledge during the transition period. My 8 years of institutional knowledge, apparently, were not mentioned anywhere in their correspondence. The betrayal was complete and calculated. My father hadn't just decided to sell our family legacy, he'd decided to sell it without me, to buyers who planned to destroy everything I'd built, while keeping my brother involved just enough to provide legitimacy to their corporate takeover. But here's what Vincent Castellano didn't know about his daughter. Here's what 8 years of building relationships throughout the wine industry had taught me. When you treat people with respect, when you build genuine partnerships, when you prove yourself through results rather than family connections, you create something more valuable than blood relations. You create trust. And over the past 3 months, while my father was secretly negotiating away our future, I'd been quietly building a different kind of future. One where Castellano Vineyards would never be at the mercy of family politics or corporate greed again. The phone call that would change everything was already scheduled for tomorrow morning. And this time, I wouldn't be the one left out of the conversation. I've learned that the most powerful responses come not from anger, but from absolute stillness. When my father finished explaining the final sale to Apex, when the silver-haired executives started discussing transition timelines like, I wasn't even in the room, I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I didn't slam my portfolio on that mahogany table or storm out like the emotional daughter they probably expected. Instead, I took a breath that seemed to last forever, looked my father directly in the eyes and said, "Congratulations. I'm sure this decision will have exactly the consequences you deserve." The word deserve hung in the air like the scent of smoke before a wildfire. Vincent's eyebrows raised slightly, the first genuine expression I'd seen from him all morning. The Apex executives exchanged glances, probably wondering if I was being sincere or sarcastic. Diego finally looked up from his window gazing, his face showing the first hint of concern I'd seen since this whole charade began. "Sophia," my father said carefully, "I hope you understand this is what's best for the family's financial security." "I understand perfectly," I replied, my voice calm as still water. "You've made a business decision based on the information available to you. I respect that." The relief in the room was palpable. Marcus Webb nodded approvingly, probably proud of how maturely I was handling the situation. Catherine Mills relaxed her shoulders, as if she'd been bracing for an emotional outburst that never came. The Apex team looked pleased with themselves, no doubt congratulating their negotiating skills for handling the family dynamics so smoothly. But I wasn't finished. I do have one question, I continued, pulling out my phone and scrolling through my calendar with deliberate casualness. The timing is interesting. Today's September 15th, and you're planning to close in 30 days. That puts us at October 15th. Yes, that's correct, the lead Apex executive confirmed, consulting his own notes. We've structured the timeline to accommodate all necessary inspections and regulatory approvals. I nodded thoughtfully. October 15th. Right, in the middle of harvest season. That's ambitious. We've accounted for seasonal considerations, the man replied, his tone suggesting he was slightly annoyed by my question. Our operational consultants have assured us that harvest activities won't interfere with the transition process. Your operational consultants, I repeated slowly, as if I were genuinely impressed. How thorough of them. I stood up from my chair with the kind of fluid grace I'd learned from years of leading vineyard tours for VIP guests. Every movement deliberate, professional, unthreatening. Well then, I said, gathering my portfolio and sliding my chair back into place with precise care. I suppose there's nothing left for me to do here except wish everyone the best of luck with the transition. I walked around the table, pausing briefly to shake hands with each of the Apex executives. Mr. Richardson, Mr. Hayes, Ms. Chen, it's been illuminating to meet you. I'm sure you'll find Castellano Valley very educational. When I reached my father, I extended my hand to him as well. He looked confused but shook it anyway. Dad, I said warmly, I hope this works out exactly as you've planned it. Then I turned to Diego, who was looking increasingly uncomfortable. Little brother, I'm sure you'll do great in your new consulting role. Just remember what Nona always said about reaping what you sow. Diego's face went pale. He understood the reference, even if no one else in the room did. Our grandmother had always warned us that shortcuts and betrayals had a way of coming back around, usually when you least expected them. As I walked toward the conference room door, Marcus Webb called after me. Sophia, we'll need to schedule a meeting about your transition timeline and final responsibilities. I paused with my hand on the door handle, not turning around. Marcus, I think you'll find that all my responsibilities have been adequately documented. Everything you need to know about operations, vendor relationships, and ongoing projects is in the shared system. I'm sure the new owners will find it very comprehensive. What about the harvest? Catherine interjected. You're the only one who knows the specific protocols for each vineyard block. This time I did turn around, offering her a smile that was perfectly pleasant and completely empty. I have complete confidence that Apex's operational consultants have accounted for seasonal considerations. Didn't Mr. Richardson just assure us of that? The silence in the room had a different quality now. Not the comfortable silence of a concluded business transaction, but the uneasy quiet that settles over people when they realize they might have overlooked something important. Besides, I continued, I wouldn't want to interfere with the new management structure. I'm sure Mr. Richardson and his team have extensive experience with premium vineyard operations. Mr. Richardson's confident expression flickered slightly. Well, we have consultants who specialize in agricultural transitions. Consultants, I repeated with the same tone I might use to say, how interesting. Not hands-on experience with organic viticulture or small batch fermentation, but consultants. How wonderfully efficient. I pulled out my business card and placed it on the table near my father. If anyone needs clarification about anything I've implemented over the past 8 years, feel free to call. Though I should mention I'll be quite busy over the next few weeks. Lots of meetings, industry connections to maintain. You understand. Vincent was studying my face now, and I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. He was finally starting to wonder if his composed, professional daughter might know something he didn't. What kind of meetings? He asked, his voice carrying the first hint of uncertainty I'd heard from him all morning. I smiled, the same smile I used when greeting customers at our tasting room, warm but mysteriously professional. "Oh, nothing that would concern you. Just some follow-up conversations about opportunities that have been developing over the past few months. Industry relationships don't maintain themselves, you know." I picked up my portfolio and headed for the door again. "Oh, and Dad? You might want to ask Mr. Richardson about his experience with Harvest Logistics. October 15th is right at peak season for our Cabernet blocks. It would be terrible if anything went wrong during such a critical time." As I walked out of that conference room, leaving behind a table full of people who thought they'd just executed a perfect business transaction, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: complete clarity. They had no idea what they'd just set in motion. No idea that while they were planning their betrayal, I'd been planning something far more sophisticated. No idea that their perfect timeline was about to become their biggest nightmare. But they were about to learn that Sofia Castellano didn't just build successful businesses. She built them with safeguards that even family betrayal couldn't breach. Elevator doors closed behind me, and as I descended from their corporate triumph back to ground level, I pulled out my phone. It was time to make a call I'd been anticipating for weeks. Time to activate a plan that would turn their October 15th celebration into the day they discovered what reaping what you sow really meant. What my father didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been preparing for this moment since the day I overheard that first phone conversation 3 months ago. While Vincent Castellano thought he was orchestrating a secret sale, his daughter was orchestrating something far more comprehensive. The preparation started with a single devastating realization. If my own family could betray me this completely, I needed to build protections that went beyond blood relations and corporate hierarchies. I needed to create a fortress around everything I'd built, one that no boardroom vote or family decision could breach. My first move was research. Not just into Apex Hospitality Group, though I learned plenty about their track record of acquiring family businesses and stripping them for parts, but into every possible alternative future for Castellano Vineyards. I spent my evenings and weekends studying acquisition structures, private equity models, employee ownership trusts, and conservation easements. I learned about family limited partnerships, succession planning strategies, and the complex tax implications of transferring generational wealth. But most importantly, I studied the legal and financial mechanisms that could give me control over my own destiny. The second phase was building relationships with people who understood the true value of what we'd created. Not just the financial metrics that Apex was focused on, but the cultural significance, the sustainable practices, the artisanal quality that made Castellano Vineyards irreplaceable in the premium wine market. I started with Dr. Helena Vasquez, my former professor at UC Davis, who now ran a sustainable agriculture investment fund called Terra Verde Capital. During a seemingly casual lunch in downtown Napa, I mentioned that I was exploring hypothetical scenarios for protecting family agricultural operations from corporate acquisition. Hypothetically, Dr. Vasquez said with a knowing smile, if someone wanted to preserve both the financial success and environmental integrity of a family operation, there are some very interesting models emerging in the market. She introduced me to a network of investors who specialized in what they called heritage preservation acquisitions, buying family businesses not to maximize short-term profits, but to maintain their long-term character while ensuring sustainable growth. These weren't venture capitalists looking for quick returns. They were people who understood that some things were worth more than their highest bid price. Through Terra Verde's network, I met Rebecca Morrison, a former Silicon Valley executive who'd made her fortune in sustainable technology and now invested exclusively in agricultural operations that met her environmental and ethical standards. Rebecca had been quietly acquiring small wineries throughout California, not to consolidate them into corporate entities, but to preserve their individual character while providing them with the resources to thrive. The wine industry is being destroyed by people who see vineyards as real estate investments, Rebecca told me during our first meeting at her Sonoma estate. I'm interested in partnering with operators who understand that great wine comes from great relationships, with the land, with the community, with the craft itself. During that conversation, I learned something that changed everything. Rebecca wasn't just looking for investment opportunities. She was looking for operating partners who could help her preserve the artisanal wine industry while building sustainable business models that could resist corporate takeovers. What if, she asked, there was a way to structure an acquisition that guaranteed operational independence while providing financial security? What if the people who built a successful operation could maintain complete control over how it's run while having the backing to expand their vision? That's when I knew I'd found my answer. The third phase was the most complex. Creating a legal structure that would allow me to acquire my own family's business without anyone knowing I was involved until the moment of revelation. Rebecca introduced me to her attorney, Sarah Chen, who specialized in complex business acquisitions and had structured similar deals for other family operations facing unwanted corporate pressure. Sarah explained how to create what she called a beneficial ownership structure, using a series of limited liability companies and investment trusts that could make offers and complete transactions while keeping the ultimate buyer's identity completely confidential until closing. The paperwork was Byzantine, but the concept was elegant. I could bid on my own family's business through intermediaries, and no one would know until I chose to reveal myself. We established Castellano Valley Holdings, LLC, registered in Delaware with Rebecca Morrison listed as the managing member. On paper, it looked like another investment fund specializing in agricultural properties. In reality, it was a vehicle for me to take control of my own legacy. But the most crucial element was financing. I couldn't just rely on Rebecca's capital. This needed to be a partnership that gave me genuine control, not just a friendlier corporate owner. That's where my 8 years of relationship building paid off in ways I'd never imagined. Remember Elena Rodriguez, the sommelier from Michelin-starred Solace in Manhattan who'd put our Pinot Noir on her wine list? She'd been telling me for 2 years that she wanted to invest in vineyard operations, not just buy their products. When I approached her about a confidential investment opportunity in a premium California winery, she immediately wrote a check for $2 million. Then there was James Wu, the owner of a restaurant group in Seattle who'd been featuring our wine since my 3rd year. He'd often mentioned wanting to secure his wine supply chain by investing directly in producers. Another $1.5 million. Thomas Beaumont, the head sommelier at the Four Seasons in San Francisco, had been trying to convince his investment group to buy into wine country for years. When I presented him with a detailed business plan for acquiring an established premium winery with expansion potential, he brought in his partners for $3 million. Within 6 weeks, I'd quietly raised $12 million from industry professionals who knew the value of what we'd built because they'd been working with us for years. These weren't strangers looking at spreadsheets. They were partners who understood our market position, our reputation, and our growth potential because they'd helped create it. The 4th phase was the most satisfying, conducting due diligence on my own company. While my father was providing Apex with carefully selected financial documents, I was compiling a comprehensive analysis of Castellano Vineyards that included information no outsider could access. I documented every relationship, every process improvement, every sustainability innovation, every customer connection that made our operation unique. I also identified every vulnerability in Apex's acquisition strategy. Their timeline was aggressive, to the point of recklessness, especially during harvest season. Their operational consultants had never managed a premium winery transition. Most critically, their business model depended on maintaining our existing customer relationships that were built on personal trust and artisanal quality, not corporate efficiency. By the time my father called that meeting to announce the sale, I'd already submitted a competing offer through Castellano Valley Holdings, an offer that was 15% higher than Apex's bid, with a faster closing timeline and no operational disruptions during harvest season. The offer was sitting in Marcus Webb's email inbox, time-stamped 3 hours before the meeting where my father planned to announce his final decision. I just hadn't told anyone to check their email yet. Tomorrow morning, when the Apex executives arrived for their celebration dinner, expecting to toast their successful acquisition, they were going to discover that Castellano Vineyards had received a superior offer from an investor group that understood the wine business far better than they did. And when my father demanded to know who these mysterious competitors were, he was going to learn that sometimes the people you betray have been preparing for your betrayal longer than you've been planning it. The call came at exactly 7:23 the next morning, just as I was finishing my coffee on the terrace overlooking the vineyard blocks where our Cabernet Sauvignon grapes were approaching perfect ripeness. I let it ring 4 times before answering, savoring the moment I'd been anticipating for 3 months. "Sophia, we need to talk. Now." My father's voice was tight with barely controlled panic, a tone I'd never heard from him in 32 years of life. "Good morning to you too, Dad. Is everything all right? You sound stressed. Don't play games with me. Get down to the office. Immediately. We have a situation." I took another sip of coffee, watching the morning mist rise from the valley floor. What kind of situation? I thought everything was finalized yesterday. "Just get here. Marcus is calling an emergency meeting for 8:30. The line went dead. I smiled, set down my mug, and took my time getting ready. There was no rush now. After months of being excluded from meetings and kept in the dark about my own future, I was finally going to enjoy watching them scramble to catch up with information I'd controlled from the beginning. When I arrived at the office at exactly 8:30, punctual but not eager, I found the conference room in chaos. Marcus Webb was hunched over his laptop, frantically scrolling through emails while barking instructions into his phone. Catherine Mills sat across from him, surrounded by financial documents and legal papers, her usually perfect composure cracked with visible stress. My father paced behind them like a caged animal, his red power tie slightly askew, his silver hair disheveled in a way that suggested he'd been running his hands through it for hours. Diego slouched in a corner chair, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. The Apex executives were conspicuously absent. "Sophia," my father said the moment I walked in. "Thank God you're here. We have a problem." I set my purse down carefully and took a seat at the far end of the table, the same spot where I'd been dismissed less than 24 hours earlier. "What kind of problem?" Marcus looked up from his laptop, his face pale. "We've received a competing offer. A serious one." "A competing offer?" I repeated, allowing genuine surprise to color my voice. "But I thought the Apex deal was already finalized." "Preliminary agreements," Catherine corrected quickly. "We haven't reached final closing yet, and legally, we're obligated to consider any superior offers that come in before contracts are executed." "How superior are we talking?" I asked, leaning forward with what appeared to be professional interest. Marcus cleared his throat and consulted his notes. 15% above Apex's bid. 47 million from Apex, 54 million from this new group. Cash offer, 30-day close, no financing contingencies. I let out a low whistle. 54 million? That's significant. Who's the buyer? "That's the problem," my father said, resuming his pacing. "It's some investment group called Castellano Valley Holdings. We've never heard of them. Marcus is trying to research their background, but they're not returning calls." Castellano Valley Holdings, I repeated slowly, as if I were trying to place the name. "That's interesting. They named themselves after our valley." The offer came through their attorney, a Sarah Chen from Morrison, Chen and Associates in San Francisco, Catherine added. "High-end firm that specializes in agricultural acquisitions. Their credentials check out, and the financial guarantees are solid, but the principals are maintaining complete confidentiality until closing." Diego spoke up for the first time. Dad, maybe we should just stick with Apex. We know who they are, we've met them, we understand their plans. I turned to look at my brother with carefully controlled curiosity. What exactly are Apex's plans? Diego? I don't think anyone explained that to me yesterday. An uncomfortable silence settled over the room. Diego glanced at our father, who was still pacing, then at Marcus, who was studying his laptop screen with unusual intensity. Well, Diego said finally, they're planning to modernize operations, streamline efficiency. Which means what, specifically? I pressed gently. Staff reductions, Catherine admitted. Automation of certain processes. Consolidation of administrative functions. How many staff reductions? Another pause. Approximately 40% over the first 18 months. I sat back in my chair, letting that number sink in. 40%. So Maria Santos, who's been with us since before I was born. Tom Rodriguez, whose family has worked 3 generations of our harvests. Jennifer Walsh, who manages our tasting room and knows every wine club member by name. They're all just expendable? Sophia, my father said, stopping his pacing to face me directly. This is business. Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made for the greater good. The greater good, I repeated. And this new offer from Castellano Valley Holdings. Do we know their staffing plans? Marcus clicked through his emails. Their preliminary letter indicates they're committed to maintaining current employment levels and preserving the artisanal character of operations. They specifically mention wanting to work with existing management to ensure continuity of quality and customer relationships. That sounds promising, I said. Much better than 40% layoffs. But we don't know who they are. My father exploded. For all we know, they could be competitors trying to sabotage our operation, or corporate raiders planning to asset strip the property. I nodded thoughtfully. Those are valid concerns. Have you tried calling their attorney? Maybe they'd be willing to reveal more information if we expressed serious interest. We've been trying all morning, Marcus said. Sarah Chen's office says, the principals will only meet if we formally accept their offer and move to due diligence. So they want a commitment before they reveal themselves, I mused. That's unusual, but not unprecedented in high-stakes acquisitions. Sometimes buyers want to avoid bidding wars or public speculation. What do you think we should do? Catherine asked. The question hung in the air, and I realized with crystalline clarity that for the first time in months, my father and his advisors were actually asking for my opinion. Not as a courtesy, not as a formality, but because they genuinely had no idea how to proceed. Well, I said slowly, if I were making this decision, I'd want to know more about both buyers' actual qualifications. Apex talks a good game about operational efficiency, but do they have experience with premium wineries? Have they successfully transitioned similar operations without destroying their market positioning? What do you mean? Diego asked. I continued, that our reputation isn't just about the wine in the bottles. It's about the relationships, the personal touch, the story we tell. Corporate buyers often focus on cost-cutting without understanding that some costs are actually investments in maintaining customer loyalty. I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app. For instance, our wine club has a 93% retention rate, one of the highest in the industry. That's because Jennifer knows every member personally, because we send handwritten harvest notes, because people feel connected to our family story. If you automate that relationship into generic, corporate messaging, how much of that loyalty survives? The room was completely quiet now. Even my father had stopped pacing. The question isn't just who's offering more money, I said. It's who understands what they're actually buying. And right now, we have one buyer who's planning to lay off half our staff, and another buyer who specifically wants to preserve our operational character. I stood up and gathered my purse. But what do I know? I'm just the operations director who built most of those customer relationships in the first place. As I walked toward the door, Marcus called after me. Sophia, where are you going? We need to make a decision about this. I paused with my hand on the door handle, just as I had the day before. But this time, the power dynamic in the room had shifted completely. I'm going to check on the harvest prep, I said, because regardless of who buys us, those grapes still need to be picked at exactly the right time. And unlike acquisition decisions, harvest timing can't be revised later if you make the wrong choice. I walked out, leaving them to wrestle with a decision that I'd already made for them 3 months ago. The call came exactly 2 hours later, just as I was finishing my inspection of Block 7's Cabernet clusters. The grapes were perfect, deep purple, with just the right balance of sugar and acidity that would make this year's vintage exceptional. It seemed fitting that on the day everything was about to change, the vineyard itself was offering its finest gift. Sophia. My father's voice was different now. Not panicked like this morning, but careful, measured. The tone of a man who'd realized he was playing a game where someone else knew the rules better than he did. Hi, Dad. How did the meeting go after I left? We need to talk. In person. Can you come back to the office? I looked out over the rows of vines that stretched toward the mountains, thinking about all the conversations we'd had walking these same paths when I was younger. Back when he used to ask my opinion about things that mattered. Back when I believed we were building something together. Actually, I said, if you want to talk, why don't you come out to the vineyard? Block 7. We're going to need to make harvest decisions soon, and I think you should see what we're working with this year. There was a pause. Sophia, this isn't about harvest schedules, isn't it? Everything's connected, Dad. The decisions we make today determine what we'll be harvesting for years to come. 15 minutes later, I watched his silver Mercedes navigate the dirt road between the vine rows. He parked at the edge of Block 7 and walked toward me, his Italian leather shoes completely inappropriate for vineyard terrain. Even in crisis, Vincent Castellano dressed like he was heading to a board meeting. All right, he said without preamble. What do you know about Castellano Valley Holdings? I continued examining grape clusters, testing their firmness between my fingers. What makes you think I know anything about them? Because nothing happens in this industry without you hearing about it first. Your network is better than most investment banks. If there's a serious buyer circling premium Napa operations, you'd know. It was the first time in months he'd acknowledged my industry connections as an asset, rather than a distraction. Progress, of sorts. You're right, I said, moving to the next vine. I do hear things, and what I'm hearing is that there are several investment groups specifically targeting family operations that are undervalued or undergoing transition. What kind of investment groups? The smart ones. The ones who understand that premium wine isn't just about real estate and profit margins. I straightened up and looked at him directly. Groups that know the difference between buying a business and buying a brand. His jaw tightened. And you think Apex doesn't understand that difference? Dad, Apex Hospitality Group owns resort hotels and restaurant chains. Their idea of wine expertise is knowing which distributors offer the best volume discounts. They're not buying Castellano vineyards because they appreciate artisanal viticulture. They're buying it because they think they can extract more profit from our assets than we can. And these other buyers? I walked deeper into the vineyard block, forcing him to follow me along the narrow path between vine rows. Heritage preservation investors, people who made their money in tech or finance and now want to invest in operations that align with their values. They're not looking for quick returns. They're looking for long-term partnerships with people who know how to run sustainable businesses. How do you know all this? The question hung in the air between us like morning fog. This was the core moment I'd been building toward for 3 months. The moment when I could either maintain my role as the excluded daughter or step into the conversation as the industry professional I'd become. Because they've been approaching me, Dad. He stopped walking. What do you mean, approaching you? I mean that over the past year, I've had conversations with at least 6 different investment groups who are interested in partnering with established wine operations. They don't want to buy us out and fire half our staff. They want to buy in and help us expand. And you never mentioned this? I turned to face him fully, letting 8 years of accumulated frustration finally show in my voice. When exactly was I supposed to mention it? During the board meetings I wasn't invited to? In the strategic planning sessions that suddenly required executive clearance for me to attend? Or maybe during one of the family dinners where you and Diego spent the entire evening talking about operational efficiency while I sat there like a piece of furniture? For the first time since this conversation began, Vincent Castellano looked genuinely uncomfortable. Sophia, no, let me finish. You want to know what I know about Castellano Valley Holdings? I know they're exactly the kind of buyer I've been hoping would show interest in us. I know they understand the difference between operational efficiency and operational destruction. And I know they're offering $7 million more than Apex because they value what we've actually built here. I gestured toward the vineyard surrounding us. Apex sees 73 acres of developable real estate with an attached production facility. Castellano Valley Holdings sees a sustainable agricultural operation with premium brand recognition and room for strategic growth. Which buyer do you think is more likely to preserve what took 3 generations to create? My father was quiet for a long moment, studying my face as if he were seeing me clearly for the first time in months. These investment groups that have been approaching you, he said finally. What exactly have they been proposing? Partnership structures where the operating family maintains control over day-to-day management while the investors provide capital for expansion. Think of it as getting the resources of a corporate buyer without the corporate mentality. And you think this Castellano Valley Holdings operates the same way? I shrugged, maintaining the pretense that I was speculating rather than stating facts I knew with absolute certainty. Their offer letter suggests it. They specifically mention wanting to work with existing management, preserve artisanal practices, and maintain community relationships. That's not corporate acquisition language, that's partnership language. But we still don't know who they are. Does it matter? We know their terms are better, their financing is solid, and their stated intentions align with preserving what makes us successful. What more do you need to know? He was quiet again, and I could see him wrestling with the realization that his daughter, the one he'd been systematically excluding from major decisions, might be the only person in the room who actually understood what was happening. The Apex executives are expecting an answer by 5 o'clock today, he said finally. Then you'd better call Marcus and tell him to contact Sarah Chen. If Castellano Valley Holdings is willing to meet, you should hear what they have to say before you commit to selling our family legacy to a hotel chain. I started walking back toward his car, knowing he'd follow. Sophia, he called after me. If we do meet with these people, I want you there. I paused, letting that sink in. After months of being excluded, after yesterday's dismissal, he was finally asking me to be part of the conversation that would determine our future. Of course, I said. After all, someone in that room should understand what they're actually buying. As I watched him drive away, I pulled out my phone and sent a single text message to Rebecca Morrison. Meeting requested. Time to reveal the hand. Tomorrow, my father was going to discover that his daughter hadn't just been preparing for this conversation. She'd been orchestrating it from the beginning. The meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock the next morning, but the ripple effects began at exactly 6:47 a.m., when Marcus Webb's phone started ringing with increasingly frantic calls from Apex Hospitality Group. I was in the vineyard again, this time with our harvest crew leader Carlos Mendoza, discussing the optimal timing for picking our Pinot Noir blocks, when my phone buzzed with a text from Catherine Mills. Apex executives demanding emergency call. They know about competing. Offer. Vincent wants you at office immediately. I showed Carlos the text and he grinned. Problemas, jefa? Not problems, I replied in Spanish. Solutions finally arriving. When I reached the office, I could hear raised voices from the conference room before I even entered the building. Through the glass walls, I saw my father gesticulating while speaking into the conference phone, his face flushed with what appeared to be a mixture of anger and embarrassment. Marcus waved me into the room as soon as he spotted me. The voice, coming through the speaker, belonged to Mr. Richardson, the silver-haired apex executive, and his tone had shifted dramatically from yesterday's confident negotiation to today's barely controlled desperation. Completely unprofessional to entertain competing offers after preliminary agreements have been signed, Richardson was saying. We've already allocated significant resources to this acquisition, including scheduling our transition team and securing financing. Mr. Richardson, my father replied, his voice strained. As our attorney explained, preliminary agreements specifically allow for consideration of superior offers until final contracts are executed. This is standard practice in business acquisitions. Standard? Practice. Vincent, we had a deal. We've been working on this for months, invested time and money in due diligence, made commitments to our board. You can't just throw that away for a few extra dollars. I exchanged glances with Marcus, who was taking notes with the intensity of someone documenting a historic disaster. Catherine sat rigidly in her chair, clearly uncomfortable with the level of conflict that had erupted over what should have been a straightforward business transaction. It's not just about money, my father said, and I was surprised to hear him echo the same arguments I'd made yesterday. This new buyer is offering terms that better align with our operational values and employee retention priorities. Operational values? Richardson's laugh was harsh and bitter. Vincent, let's be honest here. You're a family winery that's been struggling to scale efficiently. We're offering you the opportunity to modernize, to compete with major producers, to achieve the kind of operational excellence that fires 40% of our staff and automates our customer relationships, I interjected, speaking toward the phone. Mr. Richardson, this is Sophia Castellano. I believe we met yesterday. There was a pause. Ms. Castellano. Yes, I remember. I thought you weren't involved in the decision-making process. Things change quickly in family businesses, I said smoothly. Especially when new information comes. To light about what different buyers actually understand about our industry. What exactly are you implying? I'm not implying anything. I'm stating directly that your operational plan demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of what makes premium wineries successful. You're treating artisanal wine production like manufacturing widgets, and that approach destroys the very value you're trying to acquire. Richardson's voice became cold. Ms. Castellano, with respect, we've been acquiring and optimizing hospitality and food service operations for over 15 years. We understand efficiency. Do you understand wine? I asked. Have you ever managed a harvest? Do you know the difference between malolactic fermentation and carbonic maceration? Can you explain why our wine club retention rate is 93% when the industry average is 68%? Silence. Because if you can't answer those questions, I continued, then you're not buying a wine business. You're buying real estate with some production equipment attached, and you're planning to eliminate everything that justifies our premium pricing. Sophia, my father said quietly, but I could see approval in his eyes. Mr. Richardson, I said, let me explain what you're actually competing against. This new buyer doesn't just offer more money, they offer understanding. They know that our customer relationships are built on personal connections, that our reputation depends on quality consistency, and that our premium pricing is justified by artisanal practices that can't be automated without destroying their value. Richardson's voice was tight with frustration. And who exactly is this buyer? We have a right to know who we're competing against. You have a right to know that your bid has been exceeded by a superior offer, Marcus interjected, clearly enjoying the shift in power dynamics. The competing buyer's identity will be revealed during today's meeting. Today's meeting? 10 o'clock, my father confirmed. We'll be meeting with representatives from Castellano Valley Holdings to discuss their proposal in detail. And if we increase our offer? I leaned forward toward the phone. Mr. Richardson, this isn't an auction. It's a question of finding the right partner for our operation. Money is important, but it's not the only factor we're considering. What other factors? Operational philosophy, employee retention, commitment to quality, understanding of our market position, long-term vision that aligns with our family values. I paused. You know, all the things we discussed yesterday before you explained how you were planning to optimize away everything that makes us successful. The silence stretched long enough that Marcus checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Finally, Richardson spoke again. Vincent, I think we need to have a conversation about what you're really looking for here. If price is the issue, we can discuss adjustments to our offer. It's not about price, my father said, and I felt a surge of satisfaction hearing him articulate what I'd been trying to explain for months. It's about finding a buyer who values what we've built here. And you think these mystery investors value it more than we do? I think they understand it better than you do, I said. And understanding is the foundation of value. After the call ended, the conference room fell into a heavy silence. Catherine was the first to speak. Well, she said, that was certainly more contentious than I expected. They're scared, Marcus observed. Apex thought they had this locked up, and now they're realizing they might lose a deal they've been counting on. Good, my father said, surprising all of us with the vehemence in his voice. After listening to Sophia explain what they're actually planning to do with our operation, I'm not sure I want to do business with people who see our employees as expendable costs. I studied my father's face, seeing something I hadn't observed in months, doubt about the path he'd been pursuing, replaced by consideration of alternatives he'd previously dismissed. Dad, I said carefully, when we meet with Castellano Valley Holdings this morning, what are you hoping to learn? He was quiet for a moment, looking out the window toward the vineyard where 3 generations of our family had poured their lives into the soil. I want to know if they understand that some things are worth more than their highest monetary value, he said finally. I want to know if they see a partner or just another acquisition target. I smiled, thinking about the conversation that was about to unfold, about the moment when Vincent Castellano would discover that his daughter had found exactly the kind of partner he was describing. I think you're going to be very interested in what they have to say, I told him. And for the first time in months, I wasn't lying. While we waited for the 10 o'clock meeting that would change everything, I found myself walking the same vineyard, paths where this entire journey had begun 8 years ago. Not the recent betrayal, but the deeper story. The one that explained why I'd been willing to sacrifice everything to build something extraordinary, and why I'd been equally willing to fight for it when it was threatened. 8 years ago, when I graduated from UC Davis, Castellano Vineyards was dying a slow, quiet death. Not from disease or natural disaster, but from something more insidious. The gradual erosion of relevance in an industry that was rapidly evolving, while we remained frozen in outdated practices. I remember the conversation that changed my life. Sitting in this same vineyard with my grandmother, Elena Castellano, just 3 months before she passed away. Nonna was 87 then, still sharp as a blade, still walking these rows every morning despite the arthritis that made each step painful. Mija, she said in her heavily accented English, using the Spanish endearment she'd learned from our longtime workers. Your father, he thinks the old ways are enough. But the old ways, they need new hands to keep them alive. She'd been watching me wrestle with my career decision for months. The offer from Constellation Brands was generous. $95,000 starting salary, stock options, a clear path to executive management at one of the largest wine companies in the world. My professors at UC Davis had been encouraging me to take it, arguing that I could always return to the family business later, with more experience and industry connections. But Nona saw something different. "You know what your grandfather told me when we bought this land?" she asked, stopping to examine a cluster of Chardonnay grapes that wouldn't be ready for harvest for another 6 weeks. He said, "Elena, we're not buying dirt. We're buying the future for our children's children." But futures, they don't take care of themselves. She turned to face me, her weathered hands still capable of assessing grape quality with a touch. "Your father? He's a good man, but he thinks like a caretaker, not a builder. He wants to keep what we have, not make it grow. But you—" She smiled, with the kind of knowing look that only comes from 7 decades of watching people. "You think like your grandfather. You see what could be, not just what is." That conversation haunted me for weeks. I'd drive through Napa Valley, looking at wineries that had started small like ours, but had grown into internationally recognized brands. I'd visit tasting rooms that were booked months in advance, study marketing strategies that turned family, stories into premium brand positioning, observe sustainable practices that attracted environmentally conscious consumers willing to pay higher prices for wines aligned with their values. And then I'd come home to Castellano Vineyards. Where our tasting room was open only on weekends, our wine club had fewer than 200 members, and our marketing strategy consisted of placing bottles in local grocery stores with handwritten shelf tags. The night I made my decision, I sat in my childhood bedroom surrounded by job offers and business plans, trying to articulate why I was choosing uncertainty over security. I pulled out a legal pad and started writing a letter to my future self, a document I still keep in my desk drawer, a reminder of the promises I made when I was 24 and believed I could change the world. "Dear Sophia at 32, I wrote, by the time you read this, you'll either have built something extraordinary or you'll have learned why extraordinary things are so rare. Either way, you'll know you tried to honor what Nona and Nono built while creating something they never could have imagined." I went on to outline my vision, a winery that preserved traditional techniques while embracing innovative technology, that told our family's story while appealing to sophisticated modern consumers, that treated our employees as partners in success rather than expendable labor costs. Most importantly, I wrote about the responsibility I felt to ensure that the sacrifices my grandparents had made, leaving everything they knew in Italy, working 18-hour days for decades, pouring their life savings into soil that might or might not produce great wine, wouldn't be wasted on a generation that was too comfortable to dream bigger. The first year nearly broke me. I was making $45,000 as a vineyard operations consultant, living in the small apartment above our tasting room, working 7 days a week while trying to implement changes that my father viewed with suspicion and our longtime employees greeted with resistance. I remember the morning I found our head vintner, Giuseppe Ricci, teaching our newest harvest worker the same grape selection techniques he'd been using for 20 years, techniques that consistently left 15% of our best fruit unpicked because they didn't meet his traditional visual standards. When I suggested we incorporate scientific testing to identify optimal sugar levels and pH balance, Giuseppe looked at me like I'd proposed replacing prayer with mathematics. "Signorina Sophia," he said in his careful English, "my father taught me to know grapes with my hands, not with machines. Good wine comes from the heart, not from computers." It took me 6 months to convince him that science could enhance intuition, rather than replace it. We started small. Giuseppe would make his selections using traditional methods, and I would test samples from both his chosen clusters and the ones he'd rejected. When the lab results consistently showed that some of his rejected fruit actually had better chemical profiles for premium wine production, he finally agreed to experiment with combined approaches. That single change increased our yield quality by 12% in our first year. More importantly, it began building trust between tradition and innovation, showing our team that respecting the past didn't mean rejecting progress. But the real transformation began when I started understanding what our customers actually wanted from a family winery. Not just good wine. They could get that from hundreds of producers. They wanted connection, story, authenticity. They wanted to feel like they were part of something special, not just purchasing a product. I spent countless evenings that first year talking to visitors in our tasting room, asking them why they'd chosen to visit us, what they were looking for in a wine experience, what would make them remember us among all the wineries they'd visit during their Napa Valley trip. The answers shaped everything I built afterward. They wanted to meet the people who made the wine, to understand our process, to feel like their purchase supported something meaningful. They were willing to pay premium prices, but only if they believed they were getting premium value, not just in the bottle, but in the experience. So I started inviting customers to walk the vineyard during harvest, to observe our fermentation process, to meet our workers and hear their stories. I created detailed tasting notes that explained not just the wine's characteristics, but the decisions that created those characteristics. When we picked the grapes, how we handled them, why we chose specific barrels for aging. I transformed our wine club from a discount program into an educational experience, sending members detailed harvest reports, inviting them to exclusive events, making them feel like partners in our winemaking journey rather than just customers receiving shipments. Results were immediate and measurable. Our tasting room visits increased by 300% in 2 years. Our wine club grew to over 3,000 members with the highest retention rate in our region. Most importantly, our average bottle price increased from $12 to $38, not because we raised prices arbitrarily, but because we'd created enough value that customers willingly paid more. But success brought its own challenges. As our reputation grew, as our wines started winning awards and attracting national attention, I began to sense a shift in how my father viewed my contributions. Initially, he'd been grateful for the improvements I was making. But as industry, publications started calling me the driving force behind Castellano's renaissance, and sommeliers began requesting meetings specifically with me. I noticed his enthusiasm cooling. The first warning sign came 3 years ago, when Wine Spectator wanted to feature our operation on their cover. The photographer wanted shots of me in the vineyard, discussing our sustainable practices. My father insisted that he should be the primary interview subject, that the article should focus on family leadership rather than individual innovation. I didn't fight it then. I believed family unity was more important than personal recognition. I let the article position him as the visionary behind our transformation, while I was mentioned only briefly as Vincent's daughter who handles day-to-day operations. Looking back, I realized that was the moment I started becoming invisible in my own success story. And it was the moment my father started believing that the success had been his idea all along. By the time I discovered his secret meetings with Apex, I understood that the daughter who'd built his legacy had become, in his mind, just an employee who'd been in the right place at the right time. At exactly 10 o'clock, 2 cars pulled into our parking lot. From the first emerged Sarah Chen, the attorney I'd been working with for months, followed by Rebecca Morrison, whose confident stride and knowing smile told me she was as ready for this revelation as I was. From the second car came Elena Rodriguez from Solace in Manhattan and James Wu from his Seattle restaurant group, my silent investors, here to witness the moment when their faith in my vision would be vindicated. My father stood at the conference room window, watching the arrivals with obvious curiosity. 4 people, he murmured to Marcus. That's more than I expected for an initial meeting. It suggests they're serious, Marcus replied, though I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. He'd been expecting a typical acquisition meeting. Lawyers, financial advisors, maybe a single principal. This felt different, more personal. Diego shifted nervously in his chair. He'd been unusually quiet all morning, and I wondered if he was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what was about to unfold. Sarah Chen entered first, her tailored navy suit and confident demeanor immediately commanding the room's attention. "Good morning, everyone. I'm Sarah Chen from Morrison, Chen & Associates, representing Castellano Valley Holdings. Thank you for making time for this meeting." She was followed by Rebecca, who moved with the easy authority of someone accustomed to high-stakes negotiations. Behind them came Elena and James, whose presence clearly puzzled my father. They looked more like industry professionals than investment bankers. "Before we begin," Sarah said, settling into her chair with practiced efficiency, "I want to establish the framework for today's discussion. My clients have submitted a formal offer that exceeds your current agreement by 15%. However, this isn't simply a financial transaction. Castellano Valley Holdings is interested in forming a strategic partnership that preserves the operational excellence that makes this winery unique." My father leaned forward. "We appreciate the competitive offer, but we need to understand who we're potentially partnering with. Our attorney advised us that you've maintained confidentiality about the principles behind your group." "That's correct," Sarah confirmed. "However, my clients are prepared to reveal their identity and discuss their vision for this partnership, provided everyone in this room understands that this information is confidential until a final agreement is reached." "Of course," Marcus said quickly, clearly eager to solve the mystery that had been consuming him for 2 days. Sarah looked around the table, her gaze settling briefly on me with what might have been the hint of a smile. "The principal investor and managing partner of Castellano Valley Holdings is Rebecca Morrison." Rebecca stood and extended her hand to my father. "Mr. Castellano, it's a pleasure to meet you. I've been following your operation's success with great interest." My father shook her hand, but his expression remained puzzled. "Ms. Morrison, forgive me, but I'm not familiar with your background in wine investments." "That's understandable. My primary experience is in sustainable technology ventures. I spent 15 years in Silicon Valley, most recently as VP of Strategic Development at Green Tech Innovations. However, I've been transitioning my investment focus to agricultural operations that align with my environmental and social values." She gestured toward Elena and James. "I've partnered with industry professionals who understand the premium wine market from the customer perspective. Elena Rodriguez is the head sommelier at Solace in Manhattan, one of New York's most respected restaurants. James Wu owns a restaurant group in Seattle that specializes in farm-to-table dining with carefully curated wine programs." My father's confusion was palpable. These weren't the typical investment bankers or corporate executives he'd been expecting. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand. How did you become aware of our operation? We haven't marketed ourselves as available for acquisition." Rebecca exchanged a glance with Sarah, then looked directly at me. "Actually, Mr. Castellano, we learned about Castellano Vineyards through someone who understands your operation better than anyone else in this room." The silence that followed was electric. I could feel every eye in the room turning toward me. But I kept my expression neutral, waiting for the moment I'd been orchestrating for 3 months. "I don't understand," my father said slowly. Rebecca smiled. "Mr. Castellano, your daughter Sophia has been consulting with our investment group for the past 6 months, providing industry insights and helping us identify premium operations that might benefit from strategic partnership." The color drained from my father's face. Diego sat up straighter, finally paying attention. Marcus and Catherine looked like they were trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "Sophia?" my father said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've been working with them?" I stood up slowly, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "Dad, I've been working with heritage preservation investors who understand the value of what we've built here. When Rebecca's group expressed interest in partnering with family wineries, I provided them with industry analysis and market insights." "What kind of insights?" Diego asked, speaking for the first time all morning. Elena Rodriguez answered before I could. "Sophia has been helping us understand what makes certain family operations successful in the premium market. Her analysis of customer retention strategies, sustainable practices, and artisanal quality control has been instrumental in our investment decisions. James Wu nodded. We've been featuring Castellano wines in our restaurants for 3 years. Sophia's approach to building authentic customer relationships is exactly what we look for in our sourcing partnerships. My father was staring at me as if he'd never seen me before. You recommended us to them? I recommended that they look at operations like ours, I corrected carefully. Family wineries that had successfully transitioned from traditional models to premium market positioning while maintaining their core values. Sarah Chen opened her portfolio and spread several documents across the table. Based on Sophia's industry analysis and our own due diligence, Castellano Valley Holdings is prepared to offer not just a higher purchase price, but a partnership structure that addresses the concerns we understand you have about preserving your operational culture. She slid a detailed proposal toward my father. This isn't a traditional acquisition. It's a strategic partnership where the Castellano family maintains operational control while gaining access to capital for expansion, marketing, resources for national growth, and industry connections for premium market development. Rebecca leaned forward. Mr. Castellano, we're not interested in changing what makes you successful. We want to help you do more of it. Sophia's analysis convinced us that your artisanal approach and customer relationship model represent the future of premium wine marketing, not obstacles to efficiency. My father picked up the proposal with trembling hands, scanning the executive summary. As he read, his expression shifted from confusion to astonishment. This gives us majority operational control, he said slowly. You're offering to invest $54 million but only requesting 49% ownership? Correct, Sarah confirmed. Our clients believe that successful partnerships require the operational experts to maintain decision-making authority. You and your family would retain 51% ownership and complete control over winemaking, staffing, and customer relationship management. But why? My father asked, looking around the table. Why would you invest this much money without controlling how it's used? Rebecca smiled. Because Sophia convinced us that the expertise required to make this investment successful already exists within your family. She demonstrated that your competitive advantage comes from knowledge and relationships that can't be purchased or automated. The room fell silent as my father continued reading the proposal. Finally, he looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Sophia, he said quietly, how long have you been planning this? I took a deep breath. Dad, I've been preparing for the day when our family would need to choose between preserving what we've built and selling it to people who don't understand its value. When I learned about your meetings with Apex, I realized that day had arrived. His hands were shaking slightly as he set down the proposal. You orchestrated this entire offer? I provided industry analysis that helped Rebecca's group understand why Castellano Vineyards represents the kind of investment opportunity they were looking for, I said carefully. What they're offering is their decision, based on their evaluation of our operation's potential. But even as I spoke, I could see in my father's eyes that he was beginning to understand the full scope of what I'd accomplished. His daughter hadn't just found a better buyer for the family business, she'd created one. The silence in the conference room stretched for what felt like an eternity after my father set down the proposal. Rebecca Morrison, Elena Rodriguez, and James Wu exchanged glances, clearly understanding that they were witnessing a family reckoning that went far beyond business negotiations. Sarah Chen diplomatically busied herself with organizing documents, giving the Castellano family space to process what had just been revealed. Finally, my father spoke. I need a moment to discuss this with my family. His voice was carefully controlled, but I could see the tremor in his hands as he folded the proposal. Would it be possible for us to have 15 minutes? Of course, Rebecca said graciously. We'll wait in the reception area. Take all the time you need. After they left, the conference room felt impossibly small. Diego was staring at me like I was a stranger. Marcus and Catherine looked like they were witnessing a car accident, horrified but unable to look away. My father sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. 6 months, he said finally. You've been planning this for 6 months. I've been preparing for the possibility that our family might need alternatives to corporate acquisition, I corrected. When I realized you were meeting with Apex without including me in the conversation, I knew I needed to have options ready. Diego found his voice. Options? Sophia, you basically set up a competing bid against Dad's deal. I set up a superior, alternative to a deal that would have destroyed everything I've spent 8 years building, I replied, my carefully maintained composure finally starting to crack. A deal that none of you bothered to discuss with the person who actually runs this operation. We were protecting you from the stress of complicated business decisions, my father said, but his voice lacked conviction. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. Protecting me? Dad, you were planning to sell my life's work to people who intended to fire half our staff and automate our customer relationships. How exactly was that protecting me? You don't understand the financial pressures. I understand them better than anyone. I stood up, 8 years of frustration finally boiling over. I've been managing the financial performance of this operation for the past 3 years. I know exactly what our profit margins are, what our debt service costs, what our expansion opportunities look like. I also know that we've been profitable every quarter for the past 4 years. So don't tell me about financial pressures. Marcus cleared his throat uncomfortably. Sophia, perhaps we should focus on evaluating this new proposal. No, Marcus. Before we evaluate anything, I need my family to understand what actually happened here. I turned to face my father directly. You decided to sell our business because you thought I wasn't capable of strategic thinking. You excluded me from meetings, revoked my access to financial documents, and made decisions about my future without consulting me. And while you were doing that, I was building relationships with investors who actually understand the value of what we've created. Diego shifted in his chair. But why didn't you tell us what you were doing? For the same reason you didn't tell me about your meetings with Apex executives. For the same reason Dad didn't tell me he was planning to sell the business. Because apparently, this family doesn't communicate about important decisions. We just make them in secret and hope for the best. My father finally looked up at me. Sophia, I never meant to exclude you. You thought I was an employee who happened to share your last name. You thought the success of this operation was something that just happened around me, not something I created. You thought you could replace my 8 years of relationship building and industry expertise with Apex's operational consultants? The words hung in the air like smoke. For the first time in months, I had said exactly what I'd been thinking, and the relief was overwhelming. But here's what you didn't think about, I continued, my voice steady now. While you were planning to sell our legacy to corporate strangers, I was building partnerships with people who understand that legacy's value. While you were scheduling meetings to give away our future, I was creating a different future. One, where our family maintains control while getting the resources to grow. I gestured toward the closed door. Rebecca Morrison didn't just appear out of nowhere with a competing offer. She's been evaluating our operation for months, based on analysis. I provided about what makes family wineries successful in the premium market. Elena Rodriguez didn't randomly decide to invest in wine country. She's been working with our wines for 3 years and understands exactly why our customer relationships are irreplaceable. James Wu isn't some venture capitalist looking for quick returns. He's a restaurateur who's built his business on the same principles we use here. My father was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. You built this entire partnership structure? I built relationships with people who share our values and understand our market position. When it became clear that you were planning to sell to buyers who didn't understand either, I helped my partners recognize why Castellano Vineyards represents exactly the kind of investment they'd been looking for. And you never told me. Dad. When was I supposed to tell you? During the board meetings I wasn't invited to? In the strategic planning sessions that suddenly required executive clearance for me to attend? Or maybe during one of our family dinners where you and Diego spent every meal discussing operational efficiency while treating me like I was invisible? Diego winced. Sophia, that's not fair, isn't it? Diego, when did you start attending management meetings? When did you become interested in profit margins and operational optimization? Was it before or after Dad started planning to give you a consulting role in the sale to Apex? My brother's face went pale. How did you know about that? Because I pay attention. Because I notice when access logs show unusual activity in our financial systems. Because I installed monitoring protocols that alert me when sensitive documents are accessed by people who don't normally work with them. I sat back down, suddenly exhausted. Because while you were all planning my future without me, I was planning my own future without you. Marcus was frantically taking notes, probably trying to document the most complex family business dynamic he'd ever witnessed. Catherine looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. My father stared at the proposal again, as if seeing it for the first time. 51% family ownership, complete operational control, no staff reductions, preservation of artisanal practices. He looked up at me. This gives us everything we wanted from a sale, but lets us keep everything that matters about our operation. It gives us what I wanted, I corrected. What you wanted was a quick exit with maximum cash. What I wanted was a way to preserve and expand what we've built while protecting the people who helped us build it. And you found partners who want the same thing. I found partners who understand that sustainable success comes from supporting excellence, not optimizing it away. My father was quiet for another long moment. Then he asked the question I'd been waiting for. What happens now? Now we decide whether this family is capable of working together as equal partners, or whether I continue building our future with partners who actually value my contributions. You mean you'd leave? Dad, I already left. The moment you excluded me from decisions about my own life's work, I stopped being your daughter in this business and started being your competitor. The only question now is whether you want me as a partner in success, or as someone who builds her success somewhere else. I stood up and smoothed my jacket. Rebecca and her team are waiting for an answer. They're prepared to close in 30 days with terms that preserve everything we've worked for while giving us the resources to expand nationally. Apex is prepared to close in 30 days with terms that eliminate 40% of our staff and automate away our competitive advantages. I walked toward the door, then paused. The choice is yours, Dad, but this time you're making it with complete information about all your options, and this time I won't be surprised by your decision, because I'll be the one implementing it. As I opened the door to invite our partners back in, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. The certainty that regardless of what my father decided, I would never again be at the mercy of other people's plans for my future. 18. Months later, I stood on the newly constructed terrace of our expanded tasting room, watching the sun set over vineyard blocks that now stretched across 2 additional properties we'd acquired with our partnership capital. In the distance, I could see construction crews putting finishing touches on our state-of-the-art fermentation facility, a building that housed both cutting-edge temperature control technology and traditional oak aging caves, perfectly embodying the marriage of innovation and tradition that had become our signature. The numbers spoke for themselves. Under the partnership structure I'd negotiated with Rebecca Morrison and Castellano Valley Holdings, our operation had grown from a regional boutique winery to a nationally recognized brand without sacrificing a single element of the artisanal quality that made us special. Our wine club membership had doubled to over 6,000 members across 43 states. Our average bottle price had increased to $52, not through arbitrary pricing, but through quality improvements and brand positioning that justified premium pricing in the minds of customers who understood what they were buying. Most importantly, We'd accomplished this growth while expanding our workforce rather than reducing it. Maria Santos now managed a hospitality team of 12 full-time employees. Carlos Mendoza had been promoted to Vineyard Operations Director, overseeing sustainable farming practices across our expanded acreage. Giuseppe Ricci, our traditional vintner who'd initially resisted my technological innovations, now worked alongside Dr. Patricia Kim, a fermentation specialist we'd recruited from UC Davis, creating wines that honored old-world techniques while achieving new-world consistency. But the transformation went far beyond financial metrics and operational expansion. The most profound change was in the culture of the organization itself, and in my family's understanding of what leadership actually meant. My father had signed the partnership agreement that September day, but not immediately. After I'd laid out the stark reality of our situation and given him the choice between equal partnership and my departure, he'd asked for 24 hours to consider his decision. I'd granted him that time, knowing that whatever he chose, I was prepared for the consequences. The conversation we'd had the following evening, walking through the same vineyard rows where I'd first learned about winemaking as a child, had been the most honest discussion of our relationship we'd ever had. "Sophia," he'd said, his voice heavy with something I'd never heard from him before, genuine humility. "I owe you an apology that's 18 months overdue." I'd listened as he explained how watching my success had gradually made him feel obsolete in his own business. How my industry recognition and innovative approaches had made him question whether his traditional leadership style still had value. How his decision to exclude me from strategic planning hadn't been about doubting my capabilities, but about trying to maintain some sense of control over a business that increasingly felt like it was moving beyond his understanding. I thought, if I could handle the sale negotiations myself, if I could secure our family's financial future through my own decision-making, it would prove that you still needed your father, he'd admitted. Instead, all I proved was that I'd forgotten the most important lesson your grandmother ever taught me, that great leaders create more leaders. They don't diminish them. That conversation had changed everything between us. Not overnight, and not without ongoing work to rebuild trust and establish new patterns of communication, but fundamentally and permanently. Now, as I watched harvest crews working in the golden hour light, I reflected on how completely our family dynamics had transformed. My father had embraced his new role as chairman emeritus, focusing on preserving our historical legacy and family traditions while leaving operational innovation to me. Diego had found his niche in sustainable agriculture research, working with university extension programs to develop farming techniques that other family wineries could adopt. We'd become a genuine partnership, each contributing our strengths without competing for control. The industry had taken notice of our transformation in ways that exceeded my most optimistic projections. 6 months ago, Harvard Business School had featured our partnership structure as a case study in Heritage Preservation Through Strategic Investment. I'd been invited to keynote the National Family Business Association's annual conference, sharing our story with other multi-generational companies struggling to balance tradition with innovation. But the invitation that had meant the most to me came just last month when the Sustainable Agriculture Institute asked me to lead a panel on building resilient family operations in changing markets. As I'd looked out at an audience of young farmers and winemakers, many of them women fighting for recognition in male-dominated family businesses, I'd seen my younger self in their eager, determined faces. "The most dangerous assumption you can make," I'd told them, "is that your family's success happened without you. The second most dangerous assumption is that it will continue without your active leadership. Don't wait for permission to build the future you can see. And don't accept exclusion from decisions about your own life's work." After my presentation, a young woman had approached me. Melissa Chen, the daughter of a third-generation olive oil producer in Northern California who was facing corporate acquisition pressure remarkably similar to what we'd experienced. "Ms. Castellano," she'd said, "my father keeps telling me that business decisions are too complicated for me to understand. but I have ideas about direct-to-consumer marketing and sustainable packaging that could transform our operation. How? Do I convince him to listen? I'd handed her my business card and smiled. You don't convince him to listen. You build something so valuable that he can't afford to ignore it. And if he still doesn't listen, you build it somewhere else where people appreciate visionary thinking. 3 weeks later, Melissa had called to tell me she was launching her own specialty foods consulting firm, working with family operations to develop e-commerce strategies. Her first client was her father's company. This evening, as our harvest celebration wound down and our staff prepared to head home to their families, I found myself in the original vineyard block where my grandmother had first taught me to identify ripe grapes by touch. The same vines that had struggled to produce quality fruit 8 years ago now yielded some of the most sought-after Cabernet Sauvignon grapes in Napa Valley. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca Morrison. Final quarterly. Numbers are in. 28% growth over last year, 96% customer satisfaction scores, and we just received a 7-figure distribution offer from European markets. Ready to take this global? I smiled, thinking about how different this message was from the corporate efficiency reports that Apex Hospitality Group would have been sending if my father's original plan had succeeded. Instead of cost-cutting targets and workforce optimization metrics, Rebecca's updates focused on growth opportunities and market expansion, the language of partnership rather than extraction. But the message that made me genuinely emotional came a few minutes later from an unexpected source. Diego had sent a photo from the UC Davis Extension office where he now worked part-time, showing a group of young Latino farm workers he was training in sustainable vineyard management techniques, teaching Carlos's nephew and his friends the soil. Science you taught me, his text read. Nona would be proud of how we're growing the future she planted. As I locked up the tasting room and walked to my car, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. 18 months ago, I'd been fighting for my professional survival, excluded from my own family's business decisions, watching strangers plan to dismantle everything I'd built. Tonight, I was the CEO of a nationally recognized winery, a sought-after speaker on family business innovation, and the architect of a growth strategy that had exceeded every goal I'd set when I first returned home 8 years ago. But more than any title or achievement, I was something I'd never been before. A daughter whose father finally understood her worth, a sister whose brother had learned to value collaboration over competition, and a leader whose vision was no longer constrained by other people's limited imagination. The anonymous buyer my father had feared turned out to be the person who loved his legacy most. The daughter who'd been willing to risk everything to save it, even from him, and that was a victory worth more than any sale price anyone could have offered. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.